Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman had invited leading international journalists to discuss the state of global oil markets. Expectations were set for a routine update on market stability. Instead, the prince stunned everyone by revealing details of a secret, long-standing oil deal with the United States. His announcement was clear and unambiguous. This was no ordinary energy contract. It was a high-stakes arrangement with political overtones that could alter the balance of global power. Seated in the press room, reporters exchanged puzzled glances. The calm atmosphere shattered instantly as the prince began speaking. His opening words were delivered with a controlled intensity that immediately captured every listener's attention. In 2018, our relationship with the United States reached a turning point, he stated. His voice carried authority as he explained that the agreement, at first glance, appeared to be a mutually beneficial deal. However, he made it clear that there was more hidden beneath the surface. The prince explained that the deal granted Saudi Arabia access to advanced military technology from the United States. In return, his country committed to supplying oil at fixed, stable prices. This arrangement, he emphasized, went beyond simple trade. It was a strategic partnership that promised significant political support from the United States in the volatile Middle East region. The revelation sent ripples of disbelief through the room, and whispers of conspiracy began to spread among the gathered journalists. Every word was scrutinized as the prince detailed the conditions of the agreement. His factual, direct tone left little room for interpretation. There was no grandiose language, only straightforward statements that laid bare the reality of the situation. The audience could not ignore the gravity of his words. Here was a deal that intertwined economic interests with military and diplomatic strategy, a secret collaboration that had been hidden for years. As the details unfolded, the tension in the room mounted. Government officials monitoring the event from various capitals were already on high alert. In many countries, leaders sensed that this announcement could have far-reaching implications. It was clear that what had been kept under wraps was not merely an economic transaction, but a carefully engineered alliance with potential global consequences. The prince did not dwell on extraneous details. Instead, he provided a concise summary of the historical context. He recalled that the agreement was initiated in 2018 during a time when both nations were seeking to secure their strategic interests. At that moment, the deal seemed like the best option available to both parties. Yet, as he revealed now, the arrangement contained elements that went far beyond oil supply and demand. It was, in fact, a cornerstone of a covert political maneuver. Listeners in the room found themselves caught between disbelief and curiosity. Many began to wonder about the motivations behind such an audacious move. Was this disclosure an attempt to recalibrate international alliances? Did it serve as a signal to other nations that long-standing secrets were now coming to light? The possibility of hidden agendas and power plays was not lost on anyone present. Every reporter sensed that this was just the opening act of a larger, unfolding drama. The impact of the announcement was immediate. The studio was filled with a palpable mix of shock and intrigue. Some journalists scribbled notes furiously, while others exchanged short, hushed conversations about what the revelations might mean for their respective countries. The underlying message was clear. This was not a routine briefing but the beginning of a major geopolitical scandal. The prince's announcement hinted at future complications. He made it apparent that the agreement was structured in a way that could influence not only economic policies but also the regional balance of power. By linking the deal to military technology and diplomatic backing, he revealed a strategy that was both bold and fraught with risk. Governments around the world were left to wonder how this secret pact would affect their own security and economic interests. Moreover, his statement introduced an element of urgency. The terms of the agreement, he noted, had been in place for years and were only now coming under scrutiny. This timing raised questions about whether similar undisclosed deals existed between other nations. The sudden transparency was a double-edged sword. While it promised to reshape alliances, it also opened the door to intense international debate and potential conflict. Despite the clarity of his message, the prince's words left many questions unanswered. What were the full implications of having access to advanced U.S. military technology? How would the fixed oil prices affect global markets in the long term? And what role would U.S. diplomatic support play in maintaining regional stability? These unanswered questions set the stage for a series of events that promised to escalate rapidly. In that moment, the room was charged with anticipation. Every listener knew that the revelation was just the start. The unfolding details of this secret deal were poised to have a seismic impact on global politics and economics. The message was unmistakable. There were deeper layers to the agreement than anyone had suspected, and the coming days would bring further explosive revelations. The press conference ended with an air of unresolved tension. While the prince's remarks had delivered a stunning blow to conventional expectations, they also left the audience eager for more information. The statement was clear. What had been revealed was only a part of a much larger, complex puzzle. And as the world began to react to the news, it was evident that the real story was just beginning. The news from Riyadh continued to ripple across global media. Within hours of the prince's announcement, reports surfaced that Democrats in the United States were accusing Donald Trump of engaging in corrupt agreements that compromised national interests. Congressional hearings were called, and several lawmakers demanded that the administration provide a detailed account of its involvement. On Capitol Hill, discussions were tense and brisk, with committee members pressing for clarity on what they called a secretive and risky partnership. In Washington, Trump's team maintained a strict silence. They issued a brief statement saying the matter was under review and that no comment would be made until further notice. The lack of detailed information only fueled speculation among political analysts. Some former allies of the former president weighed in with cautious remarks. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, for instance, stated it was a strategic partnership. Nothing new. His comment was met with mixed reactions, as critics argued it downplayed the seriousness of the situation while supporters saw it as a defense of pragmatic international dealings. While the political debate intensified in the United States, the reaction in Europe grew increasingly heated. In major cities like Paris and Berlin, political leaders voiced strong disapproval of the emerging alliance between Saudi Arabia and the United States. In a widely viewed interview, the German chancellor stated plainly, "This undermines the foundations of transatlantic solidarity." Her remarks resonated across European capitals, where many leaders expressed concern about the implications for long-standing partnerships and economic stability. Public opinion in Europe began to shift, with many questioning whether the secret deal had been in the best interest of regional security. The unfolding scandal was not confined to political discourse alone. In the financial markets of London and New York, investors reacted swiftly. Trading floors saw a flurry of activity as energy companies' stocks experienced sudden and significant declines. Brokers reported that the drop in share prices was directly linked to the uncertainty surrounding the new geopolitical dynamics. At the same time, oil prices surged sharply, reflecting the market's concern over potential disruptions in supply. Analysts described the reaction as both a shock and a signal of broader economic repercussions. Amid these developments, representatives from China and Russia quickly seized an opportunity. Recognizing the strategic advantage that could arise from the changing landscape in the Middle East, officials from both countries set out to strengthen their presence in the region. Within a few hours of the prince's statement, delegations from China and Russia arrived in Riyadh. Their agenda was clear: to negotiate new contracts for oil supply that would bolster their energy security and regional influence. Meetings were held in secure government buildings, and initial discussions focused on terms that would be mutually beneficial. The negotiations between Riyadh and the delegations were conducted in a direct and businesslike manner. Saudi officials outlined the terms of existing agreements and explained how new contracts could be structured to serve both sides' interests. In return, the Chinese and Russian representatives emphasized the benefits of a diversified energy supply strategy, which they argued would lead to more stable market conditions. The discussions were characterized by clear, concise exchanges rather than elaborate diplomatic rhetoric. Each party presented its priorities, and the tone of the negotiations remained pragmatic, even as the political context remained fraught with tension. At the same time, the situation sparked a strong reaction in the Middle East beyond Saudi Arabia. In Iran, the political leadership took the opportunity to voice its criticism of the secret pact. Iranian politicians held a press conference where they condemned the agreement as a breach of trust among Muslim nations. They argued that the deal demonstrated a willingness on the part of Saudi Arabia to prioritize national interests over the collective interests of the Muslim world. The accusations were direct and unambiguous, and Iranian media quickly disseminated the message, amplifying public discontent. Protesters in various Iranian cities echoed these sentiments, and the political fallout in the region began to take shape. As the day progressed, the global response to the prince's announcement evolved from shock to a series of decisive actions. In Washington, European capitals, and the financial hubs of London and New York, stakeholders were now adjusting to a rapidly changing scenario. The chain of events set in motion by the disclosure was clear. Long-hidden details of an influential oil deal had exposed vulnerabilities in international alliances and economic systems. With key players now repositioning themselves in response to the revelation, uncertainty grew about the future direction of global politics and markets. This escalating situation put pressure on all involved. American lawmakers continued to press for accountability, while European leaders sought to rally support for a united response. Meanwhile, the strategic maneuvers in Riyadh signaled a shift in the global balance of power. Every new development was carefully watched, as the implications of this secret agreement extended far beyond the energy sector. The intricate interplay between political, economic, and diplomatic interests had set the stage for further turmoil. This event also activated Iranian politicians, who accused Saudi Arabia of betrayal of the Muslim world. The situation escalated further when leaked audio recordings of private negotiations between the Saudi prince and Donald Trump surfaced online. The recordings were quickly disseminated across various media platforms, drawing immediate international attention. In the audio, Trump refers to the agreement as the deal of the century and asserts that it will provide him with historic support in the oil sector. His tone is confident and assertive, suggesting that the pact will cement his legacy in energy politics. In response, Mohammed bin Salman firmly promises Trump that his administration will ensure political stability in the region, regardless of external criticism. These candid exchanges, previously confined to closed-door discussions, now threaten to upend the carefully maintained public narrative. The immediate fallout in the United States was significant. Public sentiment shifted rapidly as the recordings fueled widespread outrage. Large groups of citizens gathered in Washington, New York, and other major cities to protest what they perceived as unethical political maneuvers. Protesters demanded transparency and accountability, calling for an immediate investigation into the actions of the former administration. Chants and placards filled the streets, with demonstrators urging lawmakers to hold those responsible accountable for their involvement in the secretive agreement. The protests grew in size and intensity as media outlets provided round-the-clock coverage of the unfolding events. In the corridors of power, American Democrats wasted no time in leveraging the public outcry. Members of Congress, particularly from the Democratic Party, initiated a special investigation to determine whether the oil deal had violated American law. Committee hearings were scheduled at short notice, and key witnesses were called to testify about the nature and impact of the agreement. The investigation aimed to establish if the secretive deal compromised national interests or breached any legal boundaries. Lawmakers maintained that such clandestine arrangements could not be allowed to undermine the integrity of U.S. policies and the transparency expected in international dealings. At the same time, the international response continued to complicate matters. European leaders, already critical of the initial revelation, now reacted to the leaked recordings with renewed urgency. The recordings not only exposed covert discussions but also highlighted the depth of the strategic commitment between the involved parties. European officials reiterated concerns over the potential destabilization of regional balances and questioned the long-term implications for transatlantic relations. Financial markets around the world, which had already experienced volatility following the prince's initial announcement, reacted further to the new information. Energy stocks saw renewed declines, and oil prices experienced additional fluctuations as investors grappled with the increased uncertainty. Back in Riyadh, the leaked recordings triggered an internal crisis within Saudi Arabia. The revelation that such sensitive negotiations had been recorded and made public placed immense pressure on the kingdom's leadership. Within the royal family, divisions began to surface. A faction of senior royals openly criticized the prince for his decision to disclose information that now jeopardized the nation's economic stability and international standing. They argued that the secret negotiations should have remained confidential to protect Saudi interests and avoid provoking international backlash. Heated discussions ensued in private meetings, where some members questioned whether the prince had underestimated the potential consequences of such transparency. However, the crisis was not uniform. Many of the prince's supporters within the royal circle and the broader political establishment saw his actions in a different light. They viewed his willingness to expose the hidden details as a bold move that demonstrated strength and strategic foresight. In their assessment, the transparency, while controversial, was a necessary step to realign Saudi Arabia's role on the global stage. They believed that by revealing the true nature of the deal, the prince had taken a stand against the secrecy that often marred international agreements. For these supporters, the recordings confirmed his pragmatic approach to securing Saudi interests in an increasingly complex geopolitical environment. The leaked recordings, the public protests in the US, the political maneuvering in Congress, and the internal divisions in Saudi Arabia all contributed to an atmosphere of heightened tension. The international community watched closely, aware that these developments could reshape global alliances and economic stability. The stakes had been raised even higher, setting the stage for further dramatic shifts in the geopolitical landscape. At the same time, the prince's supporters saw his actions as a sign of strength and pragmatism. The global tension reached new heights when Saudi Arabia announced its intention to cut oil production. This decision sent shockwaves to world markets, triggering widespread panic. Oil prices surged to record levels, placing severe economic pressure on both European and Asian economies. The production cut deepened market instability and forced countries to urgently reassess their energy strategies. In response, the United States and the European Union quickly began discussions about imposing new sanctions on Saudi Arabia. Lawmakers and policymakers debated the potential impacts of these sanctions on global trade and energy supplies. Some argued that sanctions were necessary to hold Saudi Arabia accountable, while others warned that they could further destabilize fragile economies already reeling from high oil prices. Meetings between officials in Washington and Brussels sought to develop a coordinated strategy, yet the situation remained highly uncertain. Despite mounting international pressure, the Saudi prince remained resolute. In a public address, he stated that Saudi Arabia was not intimidated by the threat of sanctions. He emphasized that his country was prepared to diversify its international partnerships. Notably, he highlighted plans to strengthen ties with China and Russia, signaling a move away from exclusive reliance on traditional Western allies. This strategic shift was seen as an effort to secure Saudi interests amid the changing global order. Meanwhile, on a special broadcast on Fox News, Donald Trump defended his previous actions regarding the deal. "This was a great deal for America," he declared on air. "It provided us with cheap oil, but unfortunately, politicians are now trying to twist everything." His remarks were intended to reframe the narrative in favor of his administration. However, his justification did little to quell the criticism, and his comments only intensified the debate among his critics, who viewed his explanation as inadequate. As these events unfolded, divisions within NATO became increasingly apparent. Eastern European nations, which depend heavily on American support, advocated for maintaining a strong partnership with Saudi Arabia. They argued that the stability provided by the Saudi deal was essential for ensuring energy security in their region. In contrast, Germany and France took a firm stance in favor of imposing strict sanctions on Saudi Arabia. These countries expressed concerns over the potential destabilizing effects of the production cut on both the global economy and regional security. The internal rifts within NATO underscored the complexity of the situation. Divergent national interests and strategic priorities were coming to the forefront, highlighting the challenge of forging a unified response in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. The controversy over Saudi Arabia's decision to reduce oil output was far from over, and the next developments promised to further complicate the international response. The fallout from the previous events ultimately forced a global reassessment of oil policy. In Europe, governments and investors began shifting their focus toward renewable energy sources. Leaders announced new plans to increase investments in wind, solar, and other clean technologies. This move was aimed at reducing the continent's reliance on Saudi oil and ensuring greater energy security in a volatile market. European countries started to accelerate projects and form partnerships with renewable energy firms, setting ambitious targets for the coming years. In the United States, the impact was equally profound. Lawmakers introduced several bills to investigate the actions of the Trump administration related to the secret oil deal. These proposals called for thorough reviews of past agreements and sought to implement new rules to increase transparency in international transactions. Committees in Congress held hearings to understand the full extent of the deal and its implications on national interests. The legislative process, although slow and contentious, marked a significant push toward accountability in foreign affairs. Meanwhile, Prince Mohammed bin Salman maintained his firm stance. He publicly declared that Saudi Arabia would continue to play a key role in the global economy. During a press conference in Riyadh, he reiterated his commitment to his country's strategic goals. "Our nation remains a vital energy supplier," he stated clearly. He further explained that Saudi Arabia had successfully diversified its partnerships by strengthening ties with China. The prince also confirmed that new markets had been secured, ensuring a stable economic future despite the international backlash. At the same time, the repercussions for Donald Trump grew more severe. The former president faced numerous lawsuits and mounting criticism from both political opponents and members of the public. Despite these challenges, Trump maintained his position. In various interviews and public statements, he argued that his actions had been in the best interest of the United States. "My decisions were made to secure our national interests," he declared repeatedly. However, critics countered his claims by pointing to the legal challenges and questioning the long-term benefits of the deal. As global markets and political alliances realigned, the scandal left an indelible mark on international relations. Analysts noted that the series of events had exposed deep vulnerabilities in established political and economic systems. The scandal highlighted how personal decisions made by high-ranking leaders could have far-reaching consequences. The secret oil deal not only affected energy supplies, but also reshaped geopolitical alliances, prompting countries to reconsider their strategies and partnerships. Financial markets eventually began to stabilize, though the long-term impact of the deal continued to be a subject of intense debate. Energy companies adapted to the new market conditions, while investors remained cautious. In response to the increased demand for transparency, several international organizations initiated discussions to reform the rules governing global energy agreements. The scandal also served as a wake-up call for many nations to revisit their own policies and consider more sustainable energy sources. Within the corridors of power, the incident sparked a broader debate about the role of personal diplomacy in shaping global affairs. Politicians and experts alike argued that the secret deal was a prime example of how private agreements between leaders could override traditional diplomatic channels. This realization led to calls for more structured and accountable decision-making processes in international relations. The scandal underscored the need for clear regulations to prevent similar situations in the future. In summary, the entire episode triggered a shift in global energy policies. Europe moved toward renewable energy to reduce dependence on Saudi oil, while the United States pushed for legislative reforms to increase transparency in international agreements. Prince Mohammed bin Salman remained unyielding, bolstering alliances with China and securing new markets, whereas Donald Trump faced legal battles and persistent criticism despite defending his actions. Ultimately, this scandal left a deep mark on world geopolitics, demonstrating how personal deals between leaders can influence the fate of entire continents.